Okay. All right, welcome everybody. You're here for the workshop, Keep Public Lands Open, Responsible Recreation Tools and Tips for Keeping Outdoor Spaces Safe and Accessible. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your time and attendance here. And I think we have a great lineup and panel of speakers to provide you with lots of great resources. My name is Elena Takaki. I work at the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And you'll be able to meet some of my amazing colleagues in just a few moments. Just a few housekeeping items here. This session is being recorded and will be posted to the Cadmium website shortly thereafter, probably within the next couple of days. If you can, please mute yourselves. You all came in muted, but if you do have a question, you'll need to purposely unmute yourselves. And then please type your questions or comments in the chat. If you have any questions, comments, if you're having technical issues, please put them in the chat. And Kelly Reynolds is our chat wrangler for the day. She'll be able to make sure that you get the assistance that you need, and then also make sure that your questions and comments are addressed. Our agenda for today is we're going to go over 2 parallel campaigns going on that are working very hard to provide you all with resources that will keep our public lands open and safe during times of COVID. We'll learn about some of the campaign highlights, and then we're going to move on to our distinguished panel of speakers. And at the very end, we'll open it up for questions and answers. But again, if you have questions along the way, please be sure you put them in the chat. Okay, with this, I'm going to hand it over to Pete.
Thank you, Elena. So just to provide a little bit of backstory as to how responsible recreation got started, and again, there are 2 campaigns going on at the same time, but the Responsible Recreation campaign was born out of a phone call that started between Becky Humphreys with the National Wild Turkey Federation and Bass Pro Shops teams, their communication folks, and really it was trying to figure out a way to keep public lands open, because early in the COVID pandemic, access was being limited as more and more people were getting outside, overcrowding the public spaces. So NWTF communications team sat down and worked up this initial statement. I don't want to go ahead and read the entire thing, but after jumping on a call then with other partners that became a part of our larger coalition, we ended up polishing the messages and then launching our campaign just a short time later. And I'll actually turn it over to Taldi, who can then speak about the other campaign going on at the same time.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. So Recreate Responsibly has a somewhat similar origin story, I guess, starting back at the end of March, early April, when our public lands started to open here in Washington State. And we were super stoked for folks to get back outside, but really concerned that guidance might be inconsistent across boundaries and geographies, causing confusion. We'd experienced pretty significant confusion and overuse of certain areas when our public lands had closed in March. And so we hoped that through collaboration with local, state, and federal agencies, as well as a diverse set of user groups, that we could help ensure that our public lands reopened in a coordinated fashion and that our users were given simple guidance that was easy to remember and share for how to get out responsibly during the time of COVID, to keep themselves and others safe, but also to take the burden off our public land managers to help ensure that our public lands stayed open. The coalition is now a little over 750 organizations nationwide, and we're all pretty diverse agencies, media partners, outdoor brands, a diverse array of nonprofits, all brought together by this shared love of the outdoors and a desire to help ensure that everyone can receive the benefits of time spent outside by making sure that we're all recreating responsibly.
So the key messages that we came up with for responsible recreation did follow along similar guidelines to some of the overall to some of the overall key messages that people were being encouraged to follow just for the overall COVID pandemic. But some of the big things were obviously plan ahead, know the information of what you need to know before you head out, for whether it's for that hiking, fishing, hunting trip. Try to get people to stay closer to home. That we thought that was important. Adhering to best practices for avoiding COVID-19. So wearing face masks, staying at that social distancing of 6 foot or more. Also, again, following state and federal guidelines, and then making sure that people are leaving their places that they travel to in a better fashion than when they got there. So taking everything with them to help give the public lands the respect that they deserve.
And the Recreate Responsibly guidelines were created based on CDC guidance, and then a collaborative working group of 50 people. For any of you that have tried to edit by committee, it was a hell of an experience. And so it was a collaboration between state and federal agencies and a diverse array of user groups. So we ended up with these 7 guidelines. Some are overlapping, which is great between the campaigns. Know before you go, planning ahead, really making sure that people are ready for facilities to be closed, and also bringing those new essentials like a face covering and hand sanitizer. Practice physical distancing, playing it safe. One thing we've seen is, with our emergency crews being so strapped due to COVID, really encouraging people not to try that epic climb or summiting Mount Rainier right now, but to try and find stuff that's a little bit safer, and exploring locally or close to home. And then we've also added in build an inclusive outdoors. So making sure that as sort of a base to all of the guidelines, that we're all making the outdoors a safe and welcoming space for people of all identities and abilities.
So, good morning, everybody. I'm Sean Seville with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. I talk a little bit about what the association's been doing on this. There's a clear connection here between practicing responsible recreation and wildlife conservation. Many recreational users, especially the state-managed areas, are hunters, anglers, wildlife viewers. And so making the link to healthy fish and wildlife populations and the many benefits to people, including preserving access to these public lands for recreation, is a very important part of this campaign. So something we're highlighting in our social media content for sure. We're actively partnering with states to create some focused state-specific messaging aimed at helping states overcome the various challenges that they're facing on the ground with managing recreation, wildlife conservation, and public safety during this pandemic as well. We've got some photo contests running this fall. We're looking for opportunities to engage a broader audience with this messaging, and look forward to working with everybody to build that content out. We've also created a page on the Alliance for America's Fish and Wildlife website. The Alliance is the partnership that is working on the Recovering America's Wildlife Act campaign. That website is ournatureusa.com. And that page that we're creating for the responsible recreation component is dedicated to this sort of connection between wildlife conservation and responsible recreation. So it'll have some guidance on what people can do specifically to help wildlife during this pandemic and as they're recreating. It'll include a link to take action in support of the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, but also to do things like sign up to volunteer with your state fish and wildlife agency or another local partner, support conservation by purchasing a hunting or fishing license or a habitat stamp, using native and wildlife friendly plantings around your home or on your land, and not disturbing wildlife by getting too close to take photographs or hiking. And as part of practicing responsible recreation, the recommendation, of course, is to wear a mask in high traffic areas or around others you may encounter on trails or while recreating. So if you like to purchase an Alliance branded face cover or t-shirt, it helps the campaign to secure dedicated fish and wildlife conservation funding. You can do that by going to recoverwildlife.com. We're also creating signs with tips to prevent the spread of COVID-19. The signs are being distributed to all state fish and wildlife agencies here in the next few weeks in English and in Spanish by request. And those will be placed on state managed public lands to help combat overcrowding and overuse in some places so we can keep those places open. On the education front, Project Wild reworked some of their activities to be used in various education settings for when school returns about now. You'll hear a bit more about that with one of the panel speakers, Mark Lefebvre. AFLA's management assistance team has offered some webinars, live and recorded as well, on responsible recreation. One of our panel guests here, Michelle Dorr, was instrumental in creating that resource and can talk more about that. 2 designers affiliated with the Harvard School of Public Health will be holding a series of workshops with about 24 professionals from the Fish and Wildlife Institution, public health, academia, and nonprofit sectors to help envision a future for fish and wildlife conservation post-COVID-19 that will lead to increased relevancy. And location data from mobile phones is being analyzed to document the trend of changing use of natural areas during the pandemic and to determine if natural areas are less utilized by underserved communities. So several of the projects that we're working on there and more to come this fall.
I think it's my turn. Nice to meet everyone. My name's Marnay Banks. I'm the Chief Communications and Operating Officer for the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. We are a coalition of 60 NGOs that work to coalesce and unite folks around guaranteeing all Americans quality places to hunt and fish. So we were part of the coalition that Pete was talking about, Responsible Recreation. And then because we are also good partners with Taldy and the outdoor rec community, I think Taldy, when we first started talking about this, it was like a few days before we were going to launch, and we both were kicking ourselves that we hadn't spoke sooner. So lesson learned. So one of the goals that we wanted to do when we got going was to help bridge the divide between these 2 coalitions and make sure that there was communication between them. So I think that that was probably TRCP's primary role and responsibility in these 2 campaigns. But one of the things that we did when we first launched is, we launched responsible-recreation.org for people to take a pledge. We launched at TRCP a paid advertising campaign on social media to drive traffic to the website for folks to take the pledge. And through that effort, there were 3 different videos that we produced. One was in the spirit of partnering with Pete and his crew, was a turkey hunt video. And then we did a bass fishing video as well, and then just a general outdoor rec. So trying to target 3 different audiences, that hunt audience, that fish audience, and the broader outdoor recreation community. Through that, we drove 135,000 users to the website. I was looking last night and pulling some metrics from our meltwater system, and it looks like since Responsible Rec launched, the hashtag, and this is not Recreate Responsibly, it's just Responsible Recreation. It looks like it's reached 94 million people through social media, which is pretty awesome. What we did was we built a social media toolkit for all of our NGO partners on the Policy Council. So that's the 60 nonprofits that we work with and our corporate sponsors. And we distributed that toolkit to them so they could use it. And some of the assets that you see on the screen are some imagery that we used, and a huge thanks to Chris Burkard for donating his images for us to use, which were just beautiful. If you don't follow him on Instagram, you must. His stuff is breathtaking. And through that effort, you'll remember Pete talked about the National Turkey Federation partnering with Bass Pro, and then following the launch of the coalition, corporate partners like Browning, Shimano, and First Light all engaged in the campaign, which was really exciting. And we saw, thanks to AFWA's good work, the state agencies engage as well. So it's been a really fun campaign, and obviously still very relevant as we see COVID still prevalent across the country. So I'm happy to be a part of the coalition and also work with Taldi and her crew on the Recreate Responsibly. So it's been a really fun project. And if anyone wants a social media toolkit, we're happy to provide one. We've got some graphics and assets and images that are you're certainly welcome to use.
So for the National Wild Turkey Federation, the early stages of the pandemic actually came at a time when turkey hunters were really wanting to get out into the woods. And so even before the creation of this coalition, we were already trying to find ways to help provide guidance to those people to help stay safe when they were heading outdoors. But the responsible recreation movement really polished our messaging and helped us branch out to a much bigger audience. So the NWTF took the reins or took the lead on website creation, bringing in all the pieces that we could from the partners, all the recommendations to come up with a pretty slick, clean website. We also ended up just creating a series of, I think it was about 12 different videos highlighting things far outside the world of turkey hunting, whether it was fishing. One of my favorite videos is the one that's on the responsiblerecreation.org page right now, and it's somebody just at a campfire at night with mountains in the background. But we created those, and we also started some paid campaigns through both Facebook, Instagram, and then also did an iHeartMedia campaign, again, reaching far beyond that world of turkey hunting, because we know that the outdoors and access to those public spaces is of importance to people for countless recreational reasons. All said and done across our platforms, we had impressions of more than 6.6 million and engagements of more than 251,000, with about 175,000 of those being traffic directed to the website. So again, a lot of people beyond the world of hunting were engaged through this particular campaign, which I think is very important because, again, our public spaces are of use beyond just the things that we would normally think of.
I don't know if anyone's been able to join us from Trout Unlimited. I guess not, but so just so you know, Trout Unlimited was another one of our partners in the Responsible Recreation campaign, and they also have some resources available for folks to use, and we'll be sure to share those resources with you. How about anyone from Pheasants Forever?
Morning. This is Jared Wicklund. I'm the Public Relations Manager for Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever. And on behalf of the organization, I appreciate the time to talk about our hashtag Responsible Recreation campaign. It's no secret to anybody on this web platform today that 2020 is going to be a really hard year to forget. Between the pandemic, the wildfires, the hurricanes, and Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, our heart goes out to anybody on this call that's dealing with that right now. Trying to find positive news amongst everything that's going on. We'll take it anywhere we can get it. And one of those bright spots is going to be the upland bird season for 2020. If you're an upland bird hunter on this call, I think you can be really happy about, what we consider probably one of the best great social distancing activities for 2020. There's going to be a lot of birds on the landscape, and we're going to use that to our advantage as part of the Responsible Recreation campaign. For anybody that's not aware who Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever is, just real quick, we represent 130,000 members and 780 local chapters since our creation in 1982. We spent over $900 million on 550,000 habitat projects benefiting 19 million acres nationwide. And that includes 203,000 acres of public lands that we've acquired throughout that time. And all that's a big part of our responsible recreation campaign. Our campaign altogether, as we started out with the Uplands Are Open, it's a campaign to encourage the continuation of outdoor recreation activities in a safe and responsible manner, following CDC guidelines, similar to what a lot of the other groups here are focusing on as well. Along with that, we're also encouraging our public lands to remain open whenever and wherever possible. And given the nature of our organization's followers and interests, we're really focusing on, public upland properties for people, families, and their dogs to enjoy. So there's a couple different aspects of that. Number one, we've got the 2020 pheasant hunting forecast. You can see the image there on the left-hand side of the screen. I'm going to be working on that right after this call. I think that's actually coming out tomorrow. But Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, between the pheasant hunting forecast, the quail hunting forecast, and also our 2020 prairie grouse primer, which already came out, we deliver the most anticipated scouting report, basically, for people to start making their plans to get out and use responsible recreation on the landscape when they're chasing upland birds. It's going to be included in all social media posts related to the forecast, and it's going to reach the nation's largest collection of upland hunters. Another one would be Rooster Road Trip. This year we dedicated hashtag responsible recreation as actually a sponsor of the road trip. There's going to be some blogs, there's going to be some videos related to it, and Rooster Road Trip, now in its 11th year, focuses on publicly accessible habitat and brings generations of outdoor traditions to share real-time experiences through daily blog posts, photographs, and video. Right now, I believe we're planning on going to North Dakota and Minnesota, staying a little bit closer to home this year. And it's basically a live format hunt, and we're going to be focusing heavily on responsible recreation during that time. As you can see, I got the image on there from last year. That's just throughout the week. We had almost 2 million social impressions. So we hope to get that again this year and really advertise the responsible recreation campaign. And lastly, permanent access projects are a big part of who we are. Mother Nature really hasn't slowed down during the pandemic, and our motto this whole time is that neither can we. We need to continue focusing and moving forward with our mission. So hashtag responsible recreation is going to be used on all Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever acquisition or easements announcements to get hunters excited about opportunities in their communities coming up. In the past couple months, we've done some really awesome ones. In Minnesota, we've got a few. The Cupido Wildlife Management Area, which is part of the Latin term for the lesser prairie chicken. It was a 950-acre acquisition that's got plenty of pheasants on it as well, but aimed more at prairie chickens that a lot of people are going to be utilizing here this upcoming season. We just did the Gary Clancy Wildlife Management Area. If you're an outdoor writer on this call at all, you know who Gary Clancy is. He was a staple of the outdoor community and a writer that we did a dedication for just a few weeks ago on a beautiful property in southern Minnesota. And one thing that I heard the other day, what I thought was kind of cool related to acquisitions, is that since 2010, Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever properties and landowners that we've worked with to try to acquire, we've had over $10 million in donated land value from landowners. And we're using that to our advantage to help create more public access and help create more opportunities. I think you're going to see a big shift coming up here in the way that people want to create a conservation ethic on the landscape. And basically give back to conservation and open more public lands for people to recreate on. So that's our campaign moving forward here this fall. We're extremely excited about it. Like I said, again, if you're an upland hunter, this year is looking to be really, really, really good. And we're excited for it and taking positive news where we can.
All right, thanks, Jared. I'm wondering, do we have anyone from Ducks Unlimited able to join us today. I don't think DU was able to join us today, but they also have some resources available. And you can see that they've been doing a big social media campaign. So check them out for some resources as well. Okay, Leslie.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Leslie Garrett, and I am the Marketing and Communications Director for the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. For those of you who may not be familiar with who we are, our mission is to work with Congress, governors, and state legislators to protect and advance hunting, angling, recreational shooting, and trapping. We've been around for over 30 years now and have continued to see success in the areas of our focus. So as you've been hearing from other groups, we have been working across multiple mediums to promote and inform our audience about the hashtag Responsible Recreation campaign. Similar to TRCP, at the beginning of the campaign, we also created a media kit which contains several different types of assets, such as fact sheets, infographics, press release templates, and some video scripts, some of which you are seeing here on the screen now, which we made available to our partners and board members who were able to use some of those assets to share with their audiences. Partner organizations such as Pure Fishing, Bass Pro Shops, FN America, and others have been very helpful in assisting with those outreach efforts. We also created a secondary media kit that contained similar assets that we made available to more than 2,000 state legislators who are members of our National Assembly of Sportsmen's Caucuses. And our staff has been working pretty closely with state and federal legislators, stressing the importance of being able to get outdoors during the pandemic and to ensure that public land access and other outdoor opportunities remain viable for sportsmen and women in communities everywhere. As part of our outreach efforts, we were able to secure print ads in some major publications such as Bassmaster Magazine, which has a circulation of over 500,000, and the Pro Football and Fantasy Football Guide. Several of our staff have been participating in podcasts across the nation, including our president, Jeff Crane, who was featured on Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World podcast, where he spoke about the Great American Outdoors Act and the hashtag Responsible Recreation campaign. In addition, as a result of Jeff Crane's successful effort as chairman of the Hunting and Shooting Sports Conservation Council, hashtag Responsible Recreation messaging has now been incorporated as part of the recreation.gov website, thanks to Secretary Bernhardt and the National Park Service. Just kind of quickly wrapping things up, tomorrow evening, CSF is hosting our 31st annual banquet and auction, where hashtag Responsible Recreation will actually be the theme for the evening. And in support of that, tomorrow's event, we've received a number of videos from the leadership of our Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus who have recognized the importance of the campaign, and we included a link to the campaign website on our virtual event platform so that anybody who participates in the event tomorrow evening will be able to click on that link and take the pledge and learn more about the hashtag Responsible Recreation campaign. So that pretty much wraps up everything that the CSF has been working on. We are continuing to put together some strategic efforts for promoting the campaign here in the fall.
Great. I just wanted to share one example of how one of the partners in the Recreate Responsibly campaign has been activating. It's really great to see how the partners of Responsible Rec have been bringing the campaign to life. So this is an example from the National Park Foundation with a few of the assets that the National Park Service has created interwoven into the slide. The National Park Service has been a partner of the campaign from the beginning and has launched its own Recreate Responsibly page. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to check it out. They've also created some of these really great retro park signs to get the message out. But the National Park Foundation has been doing a number of things, specifically around earned media. They've landed over 6 media placements, including the New York Times, CNBC, ABC News, and reached potentially more than 213 million people. Their government affairs team has been doing Hill outreach around the major outdoor holidays to both the full House and Senate. And I know a few of our other partners have as well. And so we've had a number of members of Congress sharing the guidance going into holiday weekends. We were also able to get some of the Recreate Responsibly messaging into the Senate Energy and Natural Resource Committee hearing when the Great Outdoors Act was being discussed. And the National Park Foundation has also done some creative geofencing social ads on Facebook and Instagram to specifically target visitors to key parks identified by the National Park Service as high use. And these hyper-targeted ads are delivered to users within a 10-mile radius of a national park who have identified themselves as living outside the Gateway community. And the ads drive users to learn more about how to recreate responsibly prior to arriving at the park itself. And the ads ran leading up to Labor Day and were able to touch more than 400,000 users around roughly 25 key parks. They also did a tweet chat back in August, and in 1 hour they had more than 185 contributors, reaching more than 1 million accounts and potentially more than 7 million impressions. So really great to see some of their activations. And you can see here, they've come up with some pretty clever ways. Check yourself before you wreck yourself, and then sharing the guidelines on social. So I'll stop there.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel speakers now. You've just heard from Taldy Harrison. Taldy is REI's Community and Government Affairs Manager. In this capacity, she oversees REI's federal government affairs work and policy-related philanthropy. Her work focuses on fostering collaborative partnerships with a number of national nonprofits and decision makers at the federal level to ensure access to and infrastructure for inspiring outdoor recreation opportunities. Taldy serves on the board of directors of the Washington Green Schools Alliance, East Trail Partners, the Conservation Alliance, and the Mountains to Sound Greenway Technical Advisory Committee. Raised in the Flathead Valley in Montana, Taldy is an avid outdoors sportswoman who enjoys hiking, mountain biking, climbing, camping, mountaineering, and skiing. Next, we have Michelle Dorr, who's a wildlife biologist with a master's in wildlife management from the University of Missouri. She worked for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources in several capacities, dealing with human-wildlife interactions. After working for the archery industry for more than 10 years, she started Anafa Consulting, LLC, a private consulting business to improve human-wildlife, and human landscape connections. Understanding these connections requires us to understand ourselves first to build better relationships. She is a graduate of the National Conservation Leadership Institute, an elite program for conservation leaders. She obtained several certificates, including executive leadership from Cornell University, advanced Adlerian psychology from Phoenix Process Consultants, and in wellness coaching from Adler Graduate School. Adlerian principles and ecological principles combined are the heart of her purpose, to help self and others value all life on Earth. Next, we have AFWA's own Mark Lefebvre. He's a Project Wild manager with AFWA. Mark helps guide the development and updating of Project Wild content and training, including finding new ways to help educators implement Project Wild safely. Next, we have Joel Sisolak. He leads the Lands Planning and Recreation section at the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. The department is currently developing a statewide recreation strategy to be released in 2021. Prior to his work for Washington State, Sisolak served as Senior Director of Sustainability and Planning at Capitol Hill Housing, an affordable housing developer in Seattle, and as Advocacy and Outreach Director for the International Living Future Institute. He has a master's degree of urban planning from the University of Washington and resides in Olympia, Washington, with his spouse and daughter. His favorite form of outdoor recreation is hiking in Mount Rainier National Park, where he spent a summer as a backcountry ranger when he was a much younger man. Nick Wiley serves as Chief Operating Officer for Ducks Unlimited Incorporated, headquartered in Memphis, Tennessee. Prior to his work at DU, Nick served in several roles over a 30-year career with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, including 8 years as the agency's executive director. He is a past president of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and I have also just heard that he will not be joining us, which is an absolute shame. So with that, we will turn it over to panel questions.
We'll turn it over to Taldy
Sorry.
Great. Thank you for that introduction. So I just want to give a little bit more background on Recreate Responsibly. If you can go to the next slide, please. I shared a little bit prior about our origin story, but just as a reminder, this campaign really started back in April with the insight that our public lands were reopening nationwide, and we were starting to see different guidance coming from each agency or the potential for that to occur, and a real desire to think about how we could come up with easy to remember and share guidelines that would be useful across geographies and boundaries. And so we saw an opportunity to work collaboratively across agencies, boundaries, and geographies to help to create some guidance for recreating responsibly during the time of COVID. Next slide. And so even as we continue to social distance, I think we've all seen and we all know that spending time outside in parks and green spaces can provide a much needed respite during these challenging times. And I've seen numbers as great as 30% of new users or increased use in our public lands and green spaces during the time of COVID. And it's super great to see people discovering the outdoors for the first time or rediscovering them during the time of COVID. And everything from, checking out a local, state, or national park for the first time, or for those longtime users, it's become clear that we could all use a little guidance during COVID on how to care for ourselves and others and help ensure our public lands stay open. Slide. So in mid-April, with the help of a local nonprofit, Washington Trails Association, we convened an initial group of state, federal, and county agencies, as well as a handful of NGO partners, to start a discussion to find out if there was a need for collaboration and shared guidance. The first call had about 20 folks on it, 8 a.m. on a Wednesday. By the second week, we had 40, and by the end of the month, we had over 80 people joining the call. The coalition now has over 150 folks and about 100 organizations that are participating, and it's really become a model for other states. What's been really amazing about the movement is that in a really short time, the Washington group was able to pull together the initial guidance that I've shared and we'll discuss a little bit later by taking the CDC guidance and really working collaboratively with the hunt and fish community, non-motorized, motorized, and urban nonprofits, as well as agency staff, to really land on what folks thought would be the most meaningful yet shareable language. The coalition continues to meet weekly, and the focus of those weekly meetings is really on information sharing. The first half of the call is really an opportunity for county, state, and federal agencies to share what's happening with their reopening plans, and now so more sort of what management issues they're facing. And it's been a really great opportunity for the agencies to be able to share their updates or their issues one time with almost all of the outdoor users in the state or organizations representing those users. And also a great opportunity for the agencies to stay coordinated in a way that prior to the calls, they might not have all been meeting once a week. And then in early June, with the success of the Washington State Coalition, we also helped start a California outdoor business or a California coalition being run by HipCamp as well as another NGO. And their coalition now has over 100 organizations as well. And they were really instrumental in our sort of coordinated efforts around 4th of July and getting the toolkit translated into Chinese. And since July, we've added state coalitions in Colorado, Michigan, New York, and North Carolina. And all of the coalitions share these same goals of information sharing, collaboration. But I'll stop there on the state coalitions and let Joel talk a little bit more about that later today. Slide. So with the success of what was happening in Washington State, we simultaneously brought together a national group of around 20 partners to discuss the value in having the shared guidance and information sharing at the national level. And so on May 21st, we launched the Recreate Responsibly campaign nationally, and is pretty exciting. Within 24 hours, we had more than 250 organizations sign up to join the coalition. As you can see, we're now at 750 organizations nationwide, and it's really been great to have participation by almost all of the federal agencies that manage lands. Everyone from rec.gov, USDA, BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, Army Corps, and others. And so on those calls, we're having them twice a month. And it's been a great opportunity for the agencies to sort of share what issues they might be facing or opportunities and challenges they're trying to overcome. And then we do some collective problem solving and think about what resources and messaging the coalition can be pushing out to really help them reach new audiences and try to help punch through to make sure people are recreating responsibly to keep those lands open. And a little more on our origin story. In May, when we decided to launch the coalition website, we ended up building it out in 6 days without a budget or dedicated staff. And I think it just kind of highlights one thing that's been amazing about this movement is that we haven't had any organizational or paid staff working on the campaign. Everyone that's been participating is volunteering their time to help create, websites, shareable assets, videos, and other resources. And so it's truly been an organic movement, and I think a testament to the value of collaboration and the need to share guidance to help ensure people are experiencing the benefits of nature safely during a public health crisis. The website, if you haven't checked it out, I encourage you to do so. We do have the toolkit in 7 languages plus ASL, a blog where we go deeper on certain aspects of how to recreate responsibly, a resource hub that's pretty robust, and we'd love to have any resources that you have that you think would be useful for others. So next slide. I just wanted to share a couple of the state wins. As I shared, the states have really gotten involved, and it's been great to see them coordinating at the state level. A couple things here in the top left corner is a video and tweet from the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. She did a great video and showed that around the 4th of July. In the bottom left corner, we have some additional trash graphics. We had heard from both state and federal agencies that trash, excuse me, was one of the biggest issues that agency staff were facing around holiday weekends and just on a regular weekday basis. And so we've created a series of additional graphics on trash. In the top right, you can see some of the additional graphics that have been created around masking or wearing a face covering. That seems to be another major issue that agency staff were facing and was putting some of their staff in dangerous and uncomfortable positions. So trying to help get that message out as well. Super exciting in the bottom right is a proclamation from Governor Polis of Colorado, who established Recreate Responsibly Week, the week leading up to Labor Day. So really great to see their state getting engaged. And then in the middle here, we have a sign of something we've done here in Washington State, a public-private partnership between REI and the Washington State Land Management Agencies. So in partnership with our DNR, Fish and Wildlife, and state parks, we've put up hundreds of these Recreate Responsibly signs at all of our recreation sites and trailheads around the state. Slide. So as I shared, here's a little bit more about the guidance. We've worked hard to create a shareable toolkit and some assets, both sort of that longer form graphic that you see on the left, but also this shorter graphic on the right that is just the images. This is the example in Spanish. And then we also have individual tiles, so people can do Instagram stories and highlight each of the 7 guidelines. And then you can see the additional languages that we've pulled together as well. Next slide. I just wanted to share some of the metrics. We've really been humbled and really blown away by how well this campaign has taken off. For an organic campaign, it's pretty spectacular to see 432 million impressions on social, over 8.6 million engagements. With the toolkits, these numbers are before we had added the recent 3 languages, but we've been really pleased to see, over 10,000 downloads of the toolkits in the multiple languages, and really excited to see how much action we've had on the website, with close to 90,000 page views, and 58,000 of those being new visitors. So it has been really great to see that folks are finding this information useful and using it far and wide. Next slide. And so I just wanted to end with ways that each of you could engage in the campaign. You can join the coalition. Happy to talk about that. Otherwise, there's a really easy way to do so on the website. We really encourage you to share the guidelines. I think it's really easy to share both Recreate Responsibly and Responsible Recreation hashtags and guidelines because they are so useful for all audiences. If you're interested in being more engaged in the advisory group, that's the call that happens twice a month with agencies and others on the national level. Please reach out. We'd be happy to have you. If you want to write a blog, if you've been, really thinking about ways for people to get out more responsibly, or have a targeted issue you want to highlight, we're happy to host your blog and link back to your website. If you are willing or have resources to do an additional translation, or feel that there is a large population in your state that could benefit from having the guidance in their native language, we'd be happy to talk about that. And then you can also join a state coalition. I'd be happy to connect you with any of our state coalitions. And if there's not one in your state and you feel there should be, I'm also happy to talk about helping you set that up as well. Well, thank you guys, and I can take questions, I think, at the end.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Joel Sisolak with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. I want to give a quick shout out to other people here on the West Coast. Thank you for getting up early to attend this. Also just a shout out to the many people in our state, as well as Oregon and California, who are fighting the fires on both public and private lands. Just our thoughts are with you. So Taldi did a really great job talking about the Recreate Responsibly coalition and movement. I thought it might make sense to give the state agency perspective on how and why we got involved with the coalition, what we learned, and honestly what we're still learning, and then take a little bit of time to think beyond COVID, which I know can be a bit of a challenge because certainly we're still in it, and there's a ways to go. But I wanted to start thinking about what we've learned in the process of participating in this coalition and how we might apply those lessons down the road. So just as backdrop, I think it's probably true for many state agencies, and I think probably many agencies in general, that March and even into early April it was a super chaotic time. We were getting new messages from our governor, who was deciphering messages from the CDC, and we were really just scrambling at that time. We were, at the same time, we were, as an agency, adjusting to telework ourselves and trying to figure out how to get PPE for our staff so they could safely work out on our lands. We closed our lands on March 25th, and the very optimistic first thought was that we would be closed for a week. And closing a lot of public lands, we have WDFW manages 33 wildlife areas and close to 500 water access areas across the state. And Department of Natural Resources actually manages more lands, and we were also working with parks. And so closing lands itself is difficult. And we were scrambling. We ended up extending the land closure to May 5th. And one thing to know about Washington State, people here love outdoor recreation. And I know that that's true in other states too, but it's really part of our identity. And the blowback to our closures was fast and fierce. And to be perfectly honest, we could have done better. Because we were scrambling, for the closures, we were coordinating daily long hours with other state agencies, but at that point, we weren't really coordinating too much with outdoor recreationists and other agencies, including federal agencies. So part of why we ended up joining the Recreate Responsibly Coalition, and we were one of the early members, but was really to start thinking about the reopening and hoping that we could do better than we did with the closure in terms of communication, coordination, and really just kind of supporting each other through a pretty tough series of transitions and responding to kind of a really dynamic, changing landscape, coming in part from the governor's office, but really coming from the virus. So as Taldi described, the coalition, we're pretty proud of the fact that the Recreate Responsibly Coalition started in Washington State. And it started small, but it grew exponentially. As Taldi described, it was kind of a really interesting phenomenon of grassroots organizing, and a lot of credit to Taldi, as well as the Washington Trails Association and the Evergreen Mountain Bike Alliance, which were kind of the three organizations that started things. So we had, and we have in the coalition in Washington, we have the public land managers, we have a lot of the trail recreation crowd, hiking, biking, climbing, RV, boating. What's interesting, or has been interesting, is that the hunting and angling community has not been very involved in the Washington, at least, Recreate Responsibly Coalition. And I want to talk a little bit about that sort of toward the end. Taldi talked about some of the resources we developed in terms of website, the principles, the signs, and the toolkit. There was a toolkit created for social media content. One of the first products of the campaign was a video that was produced by the Mountain Bike Alliance. And if I have time at the end, it's pretty fun to watch, so hopefully we'll be able to see it. But really the most important product, I think, the most important resource has been the weekly meetings. And what's been incredible about those is it's providing an opportunity for coordination and message development and sharing across all these agencies at once. We're able to leverage the comms team in each of our agencies working together, and then have an outlet for that information to all of the user groups that were at the table too. And it just, the level of efficiency for pushing out communication was really, really great. In terms of lessons learned, there's already a lot of conversation about what is next for the Recreate Responsibly Coalition, which I think is is good. We are obviously still in it. The weekly meetings are still happening. But we all hope that the pandemic will one day end, and recognize that there's going to be a continued need for some of the systems and the coalition that formed during this time. In terms of the communication network, right now, in addition to kind of COVID response, it's helping push out messaging around the wildfires in our state and places where people can recreate where they shouldn't recreate, how they can contribute to not creating fires. Tali mentioned that there's been a lot of new users during the reopening. Our agency, in terms of licensing, have had at least 100,000 new users just since March, people who haven't bought licenses or permits before. So educating new users. We've also honestly just been seeing a lot of bad behavior on our lands. So, and that's not attributed all to the new users. So one of our future goals, I think, would be to connect some of our existing users to the networks that exist. The nonprofit organizations are really, really good at communicating with their user groups and delivering messages about positive recreate responsibly behavior. So, and then I guess I'll just end with, a hope that the relationships that have been strengthened and forged during the Recreate Responsibly Coalition kind of process, that those will endure. I think it's notable that during a time that for a lot of us has been very hard and very isolating and sometimes kind of lonely to be here in our home offices, a place that we've forged new relationships, new collaborations and coordination has been really powerful. I do think, if we do this again or expand it, I do hope that the hunting and angling organizations and the kind of the trails-based recreation groups that have been kind of predominantly involved with Recreate Responsibly in Washington can forge stronger relationships and work together. I think the kind of partnership building among those two groups, which are unnecessarily fragmented, I hope that that's something that can really build going forward from the momentum of the Recreate Responsibly and responsible recreation work. I'll end there.
Okay, thanks, Joel, and I'll pick it up from there. Good morning, everyone. So Project Wild has been, for the last 38 years, looking at how to connect education about the environment, about wildlife, into the curriculum, into school curriculum, and how to do that with the efforts of a network of non-formal education providers, and primarily through the coordinating efforts of state fish and wildlife agencies. And there have been many challenges on the way, and this is one of the biggest, maybe the biggest, but it's also one of the best opportunities for really jumping ahead in many ways, including the ongoing effort to get kids outside and learning outside. And so it wasn't long into the pandemic, and it's perhaps still not very far into the pandemic, hard to say, but it wasn't too long until a lot of educators started looking at what does safe learning look like? What does it look like in schools, or what does it look like at home? What does it look like in public spaces? And so the question I put here for my efforts with responsible recreation and safe learning is, what does safe outdoor learning look like? So one of the first resources that I came across that was looking really in depth at this was this this report. And I don't think that for this audience, this report is going to offer anything, any very much new news. I mean, you're welcome to look at it, but the reason why I wanted to point it out is because it was one of the first big, well-funded reports about how to get schools reopened safely, or what that might look like, from the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And so, I was very hopeful that I would open it up and see all sorts of references to the value of learning outside, the value of connecting with nature, information about a vast network of non-formal educators and out-of-school educators that are ready to help with that. But honestly, I wasn't too surprised to find that this report was really more about the infrastructure of schools and the programming at a more basic level, the nuts and bolts. And it may be those nuts and bolts about education and sometimes sticking too closely to those traditional models that in many ways I think has kept some of the most powerful learning methodologies out of schools, and those powerful learning methodologies are getting outside, for one thing, hands-on experiential education. And so this report, if you could advance to the next slide, please. This report was suggesting that this is what safe learning looks like, right? Outside, safe learning is outside. So it's not answering the question, what does safe outdoor learning look like? This is trying to answer the question, what does safe learning look like? And partly it looks like this for schools that can afford it. And this report estimates that these kind of setups, these festival tents, you could call them, I like to think of especially the one on the left as a Chautauqua tent. And the Chautauqua is something we can look at in history to give us more ideas about how to bring people together outdoors for really powerful learning experiences. But these tents, a setup like this might run a school $5,000 to $10,000 per classroom, right? So getting a whole school back, all the students back in outdoor tents like this is really not feasible, right? But we anticipate that many schools will start to set up tents and have some students back at some times, spaced out, right? Not too spaced out, I hope, but keeping their safe distance, right? And so in many ways, this is what, for the last 38 years with Project Wild and the work from state fish and wildlife agencies and the educators that they work with, this is what we're trying not to do, is in the seat, at the desk, not too much time doing that. So next slide, please. So here's some powerful learning, right? Out of the seat, full body, hands-on experiential learning with many of the educational benefits and the health benefits and the safety benefits, right? And so these photos were taken pre-pandemic, and they're not the very best examples of, for example, social distancing, but more and more it seems being outside is recognized as much safer than sharing an indoor airspace. Okay, and bear with me just a sec. I'm just going to advance my own notes. So, the report I mentioned earlier, to me, it really struck me as a disconnect between the focus on the infrastructure and the nuts and bolts of planning education at a large scale and what environmental educators have been saying for many years. And that is the value of getting outside and how non-formal networks can help in that effort. And so this resource from the North American Association of Environmental Education recently came out, and it really connects the planning, the curriculum side, the social aspect of making schools safe. And part of that is getting community-based environmental and outdoor education programs involved and letting them offer solutions. Environmental and outdoor education programs in communities can be leveraged to provide additional learning opportunities that are not only well aligned with educational standards, but they can add many new learning spaces for students during the pandemic, including, in public parks and public lands, in the neighborhood, in the backyard. Many of the programs that on public lands and elsewhere that are in the business of setting up outdoor learning spaces are currently closed and may remain so for as long as schools are unable to participate in their programs. So that's a big challenge, how to reconnect schools to these programs. It's a lot of logistical work. It's always been a challenge, getting kids on buses, and often a reason why there isn't that kind of participation. And now it's harder than ever, but now it's also more needed than ever. A recent survey of 1,000 environmental education and outdoor science programs found that only 22% of those organizations felt confident that they would definitely be able to reopen if their programs remain closed through the end of this year. So in other words, there's, the majority of the programs anticipate closing for good by the end of this year, unless we find ways to help people get there. And part of that is getting students there, through their school programming. And to the next one, please. Okay, so a quick example of one of our online efforts. Part of our efforts is to make Project Wild safer, not only for showing people how to get outside and use Project Wild, but also what we can do online as in addition to that, and to help people get ready to go outside. And so here's an example from our weekly Wild Learning Lab session, where we bring educators together and help them practice these online tools and online ways of doing Project Wild activities. In this case, it's land use planning around a wetland, right? Where you're going to put parks and factories and houses and a farm lot. And then, next slide, please. And connecting that to what you do when you go outside with students. So when I'm working with teachers on this and Project Wild facilitators, the challenge is, or a homework challenge is, I ask them to go out, as they would for their students, go outside, take a picture that demonstrates some of the principles we've been learning about, and show me in that picture that you're practicing responsible recreation, and we review what those guidelines are. And I think I have one more slide. Okay, or perhaps two more, but this next one is another example of how we're collecting ideas from educators in an online spreadsheet where they can input ideas about how to make Project Wild safer when you're meeting face-to-face, how to do it, how to adapt Project Wild activities when you're working online, how to do that when you're training educators to use Project Wild, and if you're a parent and maybe you don't have Project Wild resources, some additional ideas. So these are being gathered in this form, next slide, and that's being done among other ways with this survey. And then yes, I have one more, and this is one last thing I wanted to mention as part of our efforts for helping people learn how to use Project Wild safely and hopefully in public spaces is a Google site we'll be launching in October, in which we redevelop several Project Wild activities, taking advantage of all the online technologies we can that are easily accessible and low cost or no cost to educators. And so we're doing this as a Google site, and in each case, whenever possible, also building into those redeveloped activities how to take the learning outside into the schoolyard, into the neighborhood, into the backyard, into the neighborhood park or the state park, for example. And I'll end there.
All right, thanks, Mark. While Michelle is getting ready to share her slide, just want to remind folks if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Questions or comments for our panel speakers or anyone that's presented today so far. All right, thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. And thanks everyone so far. Hopefully I'll take less than 10 minutes so we leave some time for questions. But so you might be wondering why I'm here, not with the agencies or industry anymore, one of the organizations. I am a member of the Management Assistance Team National Faculty and have been doing some work on conflict resolution and wellness. And actually, they asked me to come in on the Responsible Recreation campaign because of, I think, my work actually with therapists and counselors in teaching them about the human-nature relationship and how nature acts as co-therapist. So we're very careful with the word use, and I'm going to get a little bit more into that. So that's why I'm here today. And so what I'm trying to do in this is, and actually I should let you know that the workshops that I've been doing are called Beyond Responsible Recreation. So a few of the speakers have already spoken. Sean talked about, you know, signing up volunteers, purchasing licenses, plantings on land. You know, Joel talked about some of the bad behaviors and how we need to, you know, take advantage of people's interest right now and changing some of those attitudes and working on that in the future. So that's one of the things that I'm trying to do with the workshops that I offer is moving our language and our beliefs around the use into more of a give and take relationship so that we actually don't even have to talk about the trash situation because people just aren't going to do that because they already know that they have to give back. So basically what I'm trying to do is sort of transform the way we view nature. Instead of, you know, out there, it's kind of a part of us, and then also challenge these assumptions and beliefs that there, and one of those is that there's no good and bad. It's all about our experiences, and we start with where they're at, and then we can grow from there. And when we understand that there is more of a spectrum of relationships rather than, you know, one, if someone has less experience outdoors, that somehow that's, you know, not good, that we have to make it better. It's just an experience. It's where they're at, and you start from there and grow. And really, this is about how we're affected by nature, because I think if we are really loving and affected by nature, that's when we're going to, you know, transform and change the way we treat things. So, and in my workshops, I actually get into the words responsible and recreation. And to be responsible is to have an obligation to do something. So that's kind of part of the Beyond thing. And I make advocacy a part of both the workshops that I'm doing for AFWA and the workshops that I'm doing for counselors and therapists. So it's just as important for them. So even though nature is acting as a co-therapist, I teach them too, like that. So you just had this great experience. Now what are you going to do to give back? So I make advocacy a part of everything that I do from the very start. And so just to kind of show you, so the workshops that I'm doing generally they're two-hour workshops a week apart with a pre-homework assignment. So I like that Mark talked about homework challenges, and that has been one of the challenging things is that people have to do homework before they come into these workshops. So we usually lose a few people. But so far I've had, I would say, I'm gonna not say 100%, but pretty close to 100% of the people who do the homework are so grateful that they did the homework and realized how important it is, even in our own conservation community, how we've disconnected. So I use a couple of these quotes, one at the end of each workshop. And if you attended one of these, you'll see, you would know why I use this first one. So we cannot protect something we do not love. We cannot love something we do not know. And we cannot know what we do not see or hear or sense. So I really get people in these activities to understand their own connections. And then we talk about how they can grow in their own connection and how we can take anybody with any experience whatsoever and have a different language and treatment of how to help them grow in their own as well. And it's really about this sort of getting to non-judgment about people's experiences in nature. And then this last one is, you know, Leopold is considered pretty much the father of wildlife management, so I use that in here as well. And his quote about recreation, however, is not the outdoors, but our reaction to it. So that again gets into, if we're affected by nature, then we're probably gonna have more of that loving relationship to it and gonna want to give back and be advocates for it. So, so that's why I call the workshop Beyond Responsible Recreation to Human-Nature Relationship. Like I said, some of the past, Joel talked about getting beyond, you know, what do we do? We have to start thinking about getting beyond. So hopefully some of what I'm doing in the workshops helps people reframe some of their language. I do talk about some of the mitigations of stress and anxiety, and actually have people experience it in their homework assignment. But really is about, I firmly believe that you have to take something in for yourself before you can teach others. So a lot of the workshop work is around reflecting on your own relationship. And then at the same time, they get to see other people's reactions and responses in their relationship. And we see, again, even in our own conservation community, how very different our relationships are. I start getting into how environmental identity is formed, and it kind of gets into that there's no good or bad. And then always talking about advocacy for public spaces. And then at the end, we try to, as a group, always apply these concepts to agency relevancy. And while I don't talk about inclusion specifically, the whole workshop is designed to really have that new understanding. And so it's just generally very inclusive. And I'll show you actually what, so before I get into that. So a couple of, these are some of the things that I talk about. This is basically pretty much the outline where I get into the awareness of nature connection, again, talking about environmental identity, get into childhood. Each of our identities is unique. And I very much get on the spectrum of things with our environmental identity and our relationship to nature on a continuum. And so it really gets away from this binary thing where it's us, them, in, out. In fact, I've had to challenge my own assumption just this week. I'm holding the next series starting on tomorrow. And one of the registrants said, you know what, I can't go outside for the activity, so I'm gonna have to drop out because she's in the West and dealing with all the fires, they're not supposed to go outside. So I was like, oh, you know, this is a great challenge for me. I say, you know, indoors, let's not distinguish between them. So I actually came up with a modification for her to do everything indoors if she needed to. So it's going to be I'm really looking forward to the conversation in this next group to see if there are things that we can still get the benefits and have that relationship even if we can't go out. So I'm really excited about that. Hopefully we can share that in the future. And so again, this is just a wrap up. Again, I don't talk about inclusivity specifically, but it's really happy to note, basically I just cut and pasted what people took from the very first series that we did. And it was just nice to see that, you know, they talk about language matters, not prescribing my view on someone else, nature looks different for everyone and we shouldn't judge. So it was really great to see that people are picking this up. So I'm hopeful that some of this beyond work that several people have talked about is really just changing what we believe about nature, and that it's all on a spectrum, and we just need to grow together from wherever we're at. And with that, I don't know if you can, I will stop the share and turn it back over to Elena, I guess. Are you handling the questions?
I'm gonna throw it over to David Lind. Thanks.
I just had a question for the panel as a whole, just building off of Michelle's talk about our relationship with nature, but for the panel, how has your relationship with the public changed since the pandemic?
I'll jump in. I think for us, we really found that people are looking for guidance and have been really excited to receive information on how to get out responsibly. You know, we've also seen and heard a number of the stories around people not acting responsibly, but I think that's probably more of an issue for the land management agencies. But for us, it's been great just to see how receptive the public is, and also how grateful and thankful folks are for getting guidance that's based on CDC information, but really easy to understand.
I would just build on that and say, you know, I think as I talked about earlier, you know, it was a little rocky in the beginning because we were all just blindsided by this, and people were just desperate to get outside, being trapped in our homes. You know, the outdoors felt like the one refuge. And I think, as Tully said, I think that the reception to the messages, the resources, and especially information about where people could go and recreate safely, I think were really well received. You know, I think it's been a little bit challenging out there, in part because of the heavy visitation. So I think all of the resources like the signs, et cetera, have been really useful to our visitors and useful to our staff.
So I'll jump in too. And in answer to the question, how has our relationship changed with the public? Did I get that right, David? Yeah, so, you know, perhaps for OFWA in general, and certainly for Project Wild, we're very much oftentimes behind the scenes, you know, supporting the work of the agencies that are face-to-face with the public. Yet I know for Project Wild, I've seen an uptick in educators asking, okay, tell me more, how do I get the resource? And what do you have for me that I can start on online? And so, and part of that has been our need to work with a wide range of educators, you know, Project Wild coordinators, the people that do the training, the facilitators, and the teachers, you know, to better understand what they need and how they're adjusting and learning with them, how to adjust to online. And so for me, there's been a bit more of a direct connection to the teachers in the classroom and the non-formal educators.
Yeah, and I think I would add, I don't work directly with the public, but just working with therapists and counselors, and like I said, even my own challenge this week with, you know, can we do these things? Can we do some of these things either online or indoors, whether it be homework or altering what we think about what nature is. And so I think as we develop these things, we'll find other ways to reach out to the public electronically to get them to do some things on their own. That's my hope, at least, and just really challenging what we think about. I mean, you can do things with plants, with pets. There's lots of connections that we forget about are right inside our home too.
Wonderful. Thanks, you all. Our next question is from Kim. Wondering if the presenters could talk more about how they see the Recreate Responsibly and responsible recreation campaigns evolving post-COVID. So after this is all over, where do we go with it?
I'll jump in. So this is something we've been talking about a lot. Just to be honest, when we, started this, what seemed like a crazy idea over a bottle of wine kind of origin story, we thought it would last from Memorial Day to Labor Day, really during the height of summer recreation, kind of anchored in those two outdoor holidays. And honestly, it's just grown so much momentum, and because it's still so essential, we definitely see this work continuing through the end of the year. The federal agencies have really been supportive and asked us to continue doing this work beyond COVID. Based on our guidance, all of the things in there out of the 7 guidelines are things we want people to do every time they recreate, regardless of COVID. We could take out social distancing, but I think, like many of you, I really like some distance on the trail. So that might be the only thing we update. But there's definitely conversations and I think a desire by many to keep the coalition together and think about how we can continue to try and reach a broader audience. So we're starting to do outreach to the American Library Association, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, and really trying to think about how do we get beyond our core outdoor community to reach some of those first-time users and others.
Yeah, and I'll jump in there too for the Responsible Recreation Campaign. We definitely see that there's an important need to continue working together, and we don't have any solid plans right now, but I think the conversations will be forthcoming for sure. One of the benefits of this coalition has really been the partnerships, developing these partnerships, working with organizations that we normally would not have worked with. And so we would definitely like to continue those kinds of relationships. So thank you. So I'm so sorry that we're out of time. We didn't have more time for discussion. I see Michelle posted a comment in there that she'd love to talk about advocacy from the start of all our efforts, that give take right away. So yes, that would be wonderful to continue this conversation, and perhaps we'll find a forum to do that. I want to give a special thank you to all of our panelists today and our presenters today for your time and your effort and your energy. It's not always easy. We had a very diverse group of people speak today, and it's not always easy to find that common ground, but I think it's always better when we have a diverse set of opinions and perspectives and approaches to a very common problem that we all have. So thank you again to all of our panelists and presenters, and thank you for attending. And we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.